Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tax Bite podcast series. In this episode of the Tax Bite podcast series, I'm happy to welcome two of my fellow colleagues to talk about the challenges that businesses will have in the next 6 months to 1 year. I'm Peter de Ree, and I'm happy that you tune in for my podcast series. Today, I have with me Matthias Reyntjens. Matthias is our consulting lead, and he has a lot of interactions with businesses. So I'm very interested to hear from Matthias what businesses are opposed to and face as challenges. And in addition, I have Patrick Boone with me. Patrick is our managing partner for tax and legal services, and I'm obviously interested to hear what all of this can mean from a tax policy perspective. So let's use the time we have. Matthias, let me start with you. If we look at the world, a lot is changing. You have a lot of interactions with businesses, so I'm interested to hear from you in those interactions what businesses find the most challenging developments for them.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. If we look over the last few years, and it was also clear in the surveys we typically do, one of the main topics was the challenge was the labor market, the war for talent, as it's called, which has been already there for 2-3 years. But especially now after the pandemic, we see that with the great resignation, especially in the US, but also in quite some European countries, that we see an additional shortage in some areas, some industries, and some specific, let's say, competencies. This was already there for 2-3 years, we say. On top of that, especially since the beginning of this year, we added to that the scarcity of raw materials, and also especially the energy costs rising since the situation in Ukraine. Which has caused for quite some industries a huge additional cost, but also difficulties in getting the right raw materials, going from grains in the food industry to IT components in industrial manufacturing type of industries. So all these scarcities adding to each other, giving an additional complexity in the supply chain. The next level that we see, which is even, of course, caused by the two previous ones, is then the whole inflation. And so on top of the, let's say, the energy crisis and on top of the geopolitical situation, we see an increase in prices over the last months. And this has been, especially in Europe, an important topic. Of course, we see that also the European and national banks are trying to keep the inflation under control. But of course, we see this as a quite a threatening situation for the economy to come to a pause. A fourth element that we see is, of course, the final, let's say, global shift in powers. Looking for China, for instance, where we have seen that there is the real estate market, which has indeed given a huge crisis, of created a huge crisis on this one. But also closer to home, if you look to the British economy, where you see that on top of the general situation, they're already in bad weather. On top of that, we see the inflation, the unemployment, and of course, if one country gets into, let's say, difficulties, this has an effect on all others. This comes down to, for me, indeed, that we will need a very strong leadership skills in the coming years, and not only at individual, let's say, company level or industry level, but even more so at country level. That's what we will need to bring us and guide us through this difficult weather.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. And let me first pick in on that strong leadership at country level, because, of course, countries are seeing the devastating effects on their economy and their businesses. They want to intervene. They come out of a pandemic, which already depleted a lot of public finances, I think. So then, Patrick, we have to talk about taxes. So my question for you is basically, what do you see there? Are countries reacting to this? How are they reacting to the situation?
Well, I think, Peter, you're right. So again, taxes are coming on the forefront of the discussion because if you look at it, and it's a bit similar to what we have seen in the COVID pandemic, but even also in the 2008 financial crisis. Tax policy, if it is now to fuel the redistribution debate or the fairness debate, or to nudge certain behavior towards more greenification of the economy, if I can put it like that. This is again something that we are seeing coming up very heavily. Of course, these are typically measures that are going to be relevant for the midterm and the long term. In the meantime, of course, governments need to intervene today, and I think that is what we are seeing in a number of countries. People may have seen the initiatives in the UK, but also in other countries. For example, in our territory, Peter, Belgium, where the budget discussions have been finalized, where there is, of course, a reality check between the support that can be given via a reduction of taxes, typically not corporate tax, but then more the indirect taxes. And on the other hand, the financial means that are available. And that is definitely a tension that is increasing. And you are seeing that certain initiatives that are being introduced or that are being announced rather make it a bit more difficult in reality to make it happen because the financial means are not there. And what you are seeing from a policy perspective, and that it's there a bit that, again, the question is in terms of strong leadership, at what level you are looking at that, because I think it's undoubtedly the case that we will see tax competition between different countries or even member states in a European context is likely to also again increase. I think in the next few sessions we will touch upon more the global tax reform and other measures. Well, I think this is one of the areas where we'll need to see whether this indeed doesn't get a different tone in the context that, of course, governments need to balance their budget. So a lot is, I think, coming. But on the other hand, there's also a realistic view that governments need to take and are increasingly taking of what is possible, what measures are available to basically redistribute and to indeed share the pain of the crisis in an equitable manner.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, for that. So, I agree with you. So countries do what they can. They should take responsibility where they can to take the biggest shocks and provide support. But of course, they will not be able to solve everything. And I think businesses will realize that they have a lot of tools themselves to transition and to transform themselves to be better ready for the challenges. And what else? This must be something that you also notice when interacting with different companies.
Yes, definitely, indeed, Peter. And as Patrick was mentioning, you have the government, but indeed is also the companies individually that will need to reinvent or at least transform themselves, and you can do that at let's say revising the supply chains. I already mentioned the fact that there is quite some supply chain channels and whether it's raw materials or energy or distribution flows, whatever. But of course, I mean, that can be reviewed. But in some cases, we even see reviews of the full business models. I mean, trying to find new opportunities, new ways of creating value to the markets, or even creating new markets as such. So that's really the business transformation where I see that there is a big need. A second topic that I see is the whole, let's say, workforce transformation. I already mentioned the challenge in the talent for war. Of course, by now having this, quite some companies are very digitized already, at least in the collaboration. I think it's also how can you cope with it? How can you cope with that? With the global labor market, there is quite some challenges on what we call work from anywhere, work at any time. So really, how can you transform this workforce using to the maximum extent, let's say, the great talent all over the world in the best optimal way in your individual companies. But of course, that's the second. But of course, I talked about digitalization. I think typically for collaboration, but it's also really the digitalization of the individual companies, of the full end-to-end flows in a company, whether it's the supply chain, the financial flows, and so on. Coming on top of that is quite some companies doing ERP, let's say, upgrades or implementations. So that whole digitalization in, let's say, specific tools or processes on top of the ERP implementations, I think will also give an additional challenge to prepare not only for the next, let's say, few months, but really for the next few years. And the last layer that I see, which we had started, let's say, 2-3 years ago, started really to see some traction, was all about ESG. I'm not sure where this will go, of course, because in some areas we'll see there might be even a little bit of cooling down. However, in some other areas we see an acceleration, because very often quite of the activities or the plans that were made in the area of ESG can also go hand in hand with the economical optimization. So we talked about energy at the beginning. I mean, of course, if you can reduce energy, it's an ESG topic, but it's as well a cost topic. So really, how can we reform that? How can we really go to the next level of sustainable business? And of course, this is all also, let's say, encouraged by some legislation in the European Union.
Okay, thanks, Matthias. So businesses are doing important steps to transition to this kind of new challenges, new kind of economy. So Patrick, when we see businesses becoming digital, changing supply chains, stepping up environmental efforts, then I guess also at that level there must be some opportunities or challenges from a tax perspective, right?
That's right. And I think there are many, but maybe to focus on the three main ones, I see to also pick a bit on the storyline of Matthias. I think the first one is the broader debate of the business transformations. This is clearly something that we are seeing. Many of those transformations have to do with the supply chain, trying to become less dependent on global structures, maybe more on regional or even on local ones, which of course has an impact on where value is created. So how then profit is being distributed within groups. But also has to do, of course, with the flows. Product flows may be different, service flows may be different. But specifically, of course, with product flows, we all know the fact that some will trigger excise duties. There's also the entire debate in terms of sanctions. Where can you source products from? How does that relate in an overall risk management perspective, and so on? So these are clearly things that are starting from an operational perspective, because it's not tax that drives this, but it's clearly something that if you look at it in detail, every single transformation has tax or legal ramifications that need to be looked at. So I think this is clearly something that is important. It's maybe again something that is rather relevant for the midterm rather than the ad hoc. But even today, we are seeing, of course, that supply chains are being interrupted, and that alternatives need to be looked at. And so it's not a question of then we'll deal with getting the product where it has to be, and then afterwards we will deal with the tax ramifications. If you get it wrong, your products can also be stuck somewhere. So I think it's something that is also for the day-to-day stuff, so the crisis management aspect key. So that's, I think, business transformations, definitely something that is not only at the horizon, but is definitely already today there. The second one has to do with the HR component. It's something that we have seen already increasing significantly as a result of COVID. where, of course, the debate around working from anywhere, virtual working, and so on has gotten far more attention than ever before. And we are seeing that this is basically this trend is continuing. But it's something that, of course, is complicated from a tax perspective often, not to understand what is happening, but to basically fit that new way of working into the current regulatory context. The tax treaties in terms of how do you determine when someone is taxed in a certain country, or when a company is deemed to have a permanent establishment, or in other words, a taxable presence in a certain jurisdictions, is completely out of date. It is not created historically for the current situations. And of course, there are many debates that are currently taking place as to how we need to redraft that. But this is clearly something that, in my view, should be a top priority, because it could block businesses also at a certain moment in time. Because, as I said, it's something that is there, but it's also, if you look at the war for talent, it is also something that will not go away. So it's a fundamental change. The rules need to be adapted, and the rules need to be pragmatic. They need to be business-like. That is, I think, a second key aspect I see. A third aspect has to do with what I would call financing and treasury, because, of course, we have seen years where money was virtually for free. This is changing. We're also seeing inflation picking up. So it's many companies are looking at that. And again, that's important from a treasury perspective. But a lot of those refinancing situations, or stressed or distressed M&A activities, will automatically also have tax and legal consequences. So there again, Peter, if you're referring to what do we see as being a topic, financing is definitely also one that is on the table. Again, not new. We've seen that already in the past, but it's been a while, because again, we've lived probably in a bit of an artificial world with the interest that we had, with the low inflation that we had. This, of course, is now fundamentally changing, and companies need to adapt.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, for sharing that. I, of course, fully agree with you, and you touch on a lot of interesting topics. What we will do is in the next weeks, because this is what we had time for today, but in the next weeks, we will touch on each of those specific topics in a bit more detail. Let's say by year end, we will try to cover them all. I wrote down business transformation, working from anywhere, financing, HR. So we will, with the right experts, have a discussion on the impact that all of this will have for businesses. And this will happen in the next few weeks. So with that, that's a warm invite for everyone to tune in on the podcast series, to subscribe on Spotify, Google, or Apple, and to not miss out any editions of the podcast. That's all that we had time for today. So Matthias and Patrick, thank you very much for sharing that with us and the audience. And for the audience, thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you again in another podcast.